Cold air moved slowly across the empty parking lot behind the roadside diner. Neon light flickered in uneven pulses, painting the cracked asphalt in soft red and blue. No cars remained except one dark sedan resting too quietly near the edge of the trees. Inside the diner, the night shift coffee still steamed in a forgotten cup. Grease cooled on a metal grill that had stopped sizzling hours earlier. A chair lay tipped sideways near booth 7, as if someone had stood too fast or been forced to move. Nothing looked dramatic at first glance. Nothing looked like the beginning of a mystery that would shake an entire county. But the floor told a different story. The stain near the counter had been scrubbed hard. Too hard. Hard enough to blur shape but not memory. Under the harsh white light, the clean surface still held a faint shadow. A pattern that did not belong to spilled coffee or dropped food. It belonged to something heavier. Something final. The official report called the night simple. A late argument. A sudden act of violence. A timeline that closed the case before sunrise. Most people believed it because simple stories feel safe. Simple stories let a town sleep. But one person never slept again. Aldrin Vale stood outside the diner long after the police tape had faded from the doors. Tall frame still as winter branches. Eyes fixed not on the building but on the space between memories. Aldrin had not been family. Not a detective. Not even a witness. Just a quiet forensic reconstruction specialist who studied patterns most people never noticed. Drops. Angles. Distances. Moments frozen in motion. 4 years Aldrin worked in distant cities helping strangers understand their final minutes. Careful work. Precise work. Work that rarely followed emotion. Until this night. Because the person who died inside booth 7 had once believed Aldrin could explain anything. Even fear. Even truth. And Aldrin had promised. Promises feel small when spoken in warm daylight. They feel heavier when repeated inside silence. The town moved forward quickly after the funeral. Flowers wilted. News vans left. Neighbors returned to morning routines and evening television. Only the diner remained closed. Windows dark. Sign unplugged. Like a memory the town preferred not to reopen. But memory has weight. And weight leaves marks. 3 months later Aldrin received a thin envelope with no return address. Inside rested a single photograph. Nothing else. The image showed the diner floor before it had been cleaned. Before the timeline had been written. Before the truth had been decided. Dark stains stretched across tile in quiet geometry. Not random. Not chaotic. Organized. Intentional. Aldrin studied the photograph for a long time without moving. Breath slow. Mind drifting through angles and distances like walking familiar streets. Something in the pattern felt wrong. Not impossible. Just unfinished. Like a sentence cut short in the middle of meaning. The official report described a struggle near the counter. But the photograph suggested stillness. Controlled motion. A direction that did not match panic. Aldrin placed the photograph beside the printed timeline from the case file. 2 stories resting inches apart. Both claiming to be real. Only one could be true. Outside the apartment window morning traffic began to rise. Engines. Footsteps. Ordinary life continuing without permission. Aldrin barely noticed. Because in that quiet room the past had started breathing again. By afternoon Aldrin was already driving west. Highway stretching endless beneath pale winter sky. Radio silent. Hand steady on the wheel. Road trips across America carry a strange feeling. Freedom mixed with distance. Movement mixed with memory. Gas stations appeared like lonely islands. Billboards promised cheap coffee and quiet motels. Church signs offered hope in simple painted letters. Each mile felt like stepping backward instead of forward. Closer to the diner. Closer to booth 7. Closer to a promise waiting in the dark. Small towns appear suddenly along long highways. One moment empty road. Next moment a cluster of rooftops. A water tower. Flags moving slowly in warm wind. This town looked the same as it always had. Peaceful enough to hide secrets without trying. No one expected Eldrin to return. Most people barely remembered the quiet specialist who had attended the funeral without speaking. But silence often listens more carefully than questions. The diner stood at the far end of Main Street. Windows covered with brown paper from the inside. Parking lot cracked by early winter frost. Weeds pushing through lines in the pavement like time refusing to stop. Eldrin stopped the car but did not step out immediately. Just watched. Waiting for a feeling. A signal. Anything. Nothing came. Only wind brushing loose gravel across pavement. A distant dog barking somewhere behind the buildings. The soft hum of power lines stretching toward the highway. Finally the car door opened with a tired metal sound. Dust drifting through thin sunlight as Eldrin stepped forward. Inside the diner the air smelled like old grease and forgotten conversations. Every object remained frozen exactly where the investigation had ended. Menus stacked neatly. Napkin holder still half full. Coffee machine silent but ready. Time had not healed this place. It had only paused it. Eldrin walked slowly toward the counter. Each step careful as if sound might disturb something invisible. Shoes pressing lightly against tile that once held chaos. Booth 7 waited in shadow near the back wall. Seat cushions slightly torn. Table surface scratched by years of ordinary mornings and late-night confessions. Ordinary places often hold the deepest endings. Eldrin stopped beside the faint mark on the floor where cleaning chemicals had failed to erase history completely. Even without the photograph the pattern whispered quietly. Direction. Height. Force. Sequence. Details invisible to most eyes. Clear as daylight to someone trained to see motion after it ends. The official timeline replayed in memory. Argument. Push. Fall. Impact. Simple. Quick. Closed. But the floor suggested something slower. Something measured. Something planned. A quiet chill moved through the empty diner though afternoon sun still touched the windows. The kind of cold that does not belong to weather? Eldrin knelt beside the faded stain. Not touching. Just observing. Respecting the silence of a final moment. Forensic work is less about blood and more about physics. Gravity never lies. Angles never panic. Motion always leaves a signature behind. And this signature did not belong to the story the town had accepted. Behind Eldrin a floorboard creaked softly. Not loud. Just enough to remind that empty places are rarely empty. Eldrin stood slowly and turned toward the sound. At the far end of the diner near the kitchen doorway stood a figure half hidden in shadow. Still. Watching. As if the person had been there long before Eldrin arrived. Neither spoke at first. Silence stretching thin between them. Heavy but patient. The stranger finally stepped forward into weak afternoon light. Face calm. Eyes carrying the weight of someone who had waited too long for something to end. Voice low. Careful. Almost warning. You should not be here. Eldrin answered without surprise. Truth rarely asks permission. Neither should lies. The words settled into the quiet room like dust returning to the floor. Unmoving. Impossible to take back. For a moment it felt as if the diner itself was listening. Walls holding breath. Windows refusing to blink. The stranger glanced toward booth 7. Then back to Eldrin. Jaw tight with something unspoken. Case is closed. Eldrin looked again at the faint pattern on the tile. Closed is not the same as finished. Wind pushed gently against the paper-covered windows. Soft sound like distant breathing traveling through empty space. Somewhere outside a truck passed along the highway. Life continuing forward without noticing the past pulling backward. Inside the diner time had begun to move again. Slow. Careful. Unavoidable. Two strangers stood over a story everyone else believed. One protecting silence. One searching for truth. And between them waited a single question heavy enough to reopen everything. If the blood pattern told a different night, then whose timeline had the town buried? The stranger did not answer right away. Silence settled again between the cracked tiles and the shadowed booths. Outside the wind brushed against the diner walls with a slow patient sound. Like time waiting for someone to admit the truth. Eldrin remained still. Not threatening. Not afraid. Just present in the way only people who study endings learn to be. The stranger's shoulders lowered slightly. Not relief. More like exhaustion finally showing through control. You should have stayed gone. The words sounded less like a warning and more like regret. Eldrin's voice stayed calm. Some promises do not stay buried. A long pause followed. The kind that stretches memory instead of seconds. The stranger looked toward the kitchen doorway. Toward darkness that once held noise and heat and ordinary life. Now only dust and quiet. People here want peace. They got their answer. They moved on. Eldrin glanced again at the faint mark on the floor. Peace built on the wrong story does not last. The stranger's jaw tightened. For a moment it seemed anger might rise. But it faded before reaching the surface. You always did this. Turn small things into questions no one wants. Eldrin did not argue. Because the stranger was right in a way. Questions disturb comfort. Truth disturbs even more. Instead Eldrin asked softly. Who sent the photograph? The stranger's eyes flickered. Quick. Almost hidden. But enough. So there was a sender. Someone else still watching the past. I do not know what you are talking about. The lie sounded practiced. Not cruel. Just tired. Eldrin let the silence answer instead of pushing. Pressure breaks people. Quiet invites them. Seconds passed. Then more. Finally the stranger spoke again. Lower now. Even if the timeline was wrong. What would changing it fix? A simple question. But heavy. Eldrin thought of the funeral. Of faces trying to understand something that felt unfinished. Of a promise spoken in a hospital hallway filled with machines and fading light. Truth does not fix the past. But lies keep hurting the present. The stranger closed their eyes briefly. As if the sentence landed somewhere deep. You should leave before someone sees you here. Someone. Not police. Not owner. Someone else. Eldrin noticed. Who is watching? No answer came. Only the sound of breathing in an empty room. That was answer enough. Eldrin stepped back from the stain. Slow. Respectful. Not surrender. Just patience. I will come back tomorrow. The stranger looked up sharply. Fear this time. Clear and real. Do not? Why? Because some stories are dangerous when reopened. Aldrin held the gaze. Dangerous for who? No reply. Only silence closing again like a door. So Aldrin left. Outside the air felt colder than before. Clouds drifting low across a pale afternoon sky. The town still looked peaceful. Still ordinary. Still pretending nothing waited beneath the surface. Aldrin drove slowly along Main Street. Past the barber shop with faded stripes. Past the grocery store window filled with discount signs. Past a small church where wind moved gently through an empty parking lot. American small towns carry memory in quiet ways. Paint on wood. Names on mailboxes. Photographs in dusty frames. Nothing disappears completely. It only waits. The motel near the highway had not changed in years. Single story. Flickering vacancy sign. Office bell that rang too loudly in the stillness. The clerk barely looked up while handing over a key. Routine stronger than curiosity. Room 12 smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaning spray. A narrow bed. A humming air unit. Curtains too thin to block the parking lot light. Aldrin placed the photograph on the small table beside the case file. Two versions of the same night. Still refusing to agree. 4 hours. Aldrin studied angles again. Distances. Drop direction. Impact height. Outside evening slowly replaced afternoon. Cars came and went. Footsteps past the door. A television murmured in another room. Ordinary sounds. Comforting in their normalcy. But inside room 12 nothing felt ordinary. Because one detail refused to settle. The official report claimed motion toward the counter. But the pattern showed movement away. Not struggle. Not chaos. Guided position. As if the final moment had been controlled. Not sudden. That changed everything. Near midnight Aldrin finally leaned back in the chair. Eyes tired. Mind still racing through invisible geometry. If the ending was controlled, then someone had time. Time meant intention. And intention meant the story was never simple. A soft knock touched the motel door. Quiet. Careful. Almost uncertain. Aldrin did not move at first. Listening. Another knock. Same rhythm. Not police. Too gentle. Aldrin opened the door slowly. A young delivery worker stood outside holding a paper bag. Confused eyes. Apologetic posture. Sorry. Front desk said this was yours. Aldrin had ordered nothing. Inside the bag rested only a folded note. No food. No receipt. The worker already walking away before questions could form. Back inside. Door locked. Curtains checked. Aldrin unfolded the note. 3 words written in uneven ink. Stop digging now. No name. No threat. Just instruction. Aldrin stared at the letters for a long moment. Heart steady. Mind quiet. Fear often hides inside urgency. But this message felt different. Not anger. Not panic. Warning. Someone believed danger was real. And close. Instead of stopping, Aldrin placed the note beside the photograph. 2 messages now. One silent. One spoken. Both pointing to the same truth. The night inside the diner had not ended the way the town believed. Sleep came slowly. Broken by fragments of memory. Hospital lights. A voice asking for truth. A promise repeated again and again. Morning arrived pale and cold. Fog rested low over the highway. Softening distance. Blurring edges. Aldrin returned to the diner just after sunrise. Parking in the same empty space as before. But something had changed. The paper covering the windows had been removed. Inside, lights were on. And the door stood slightly open. Not abandoned anymore. Not silent. Someone else had arrived before Aldrin. A quiet feeling moved through the cold air. Not quite fear. Not quite hope. Just certainty. Whatever waited inside would pull the past fully into the present. Aldrin stepped forward, hand resting briefly on the metal door. Then pushed it open. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Sharp. New. Impossible. Booth 7 no longer sat in darkness. Morning light reached across the floor, touching the faded stain like a spotlight revealing memory. And behind the counter, another figure stood waiting. Older. Still. Eyes carrying recognition that felt immediate and heavy. Not a stranger this time. Someone who knew exactly why Aldrin had come back. The voice was calm, but certain. You finally saw it too. Aldrin's breath slowed. Yes. A small nod from behind the counter. Not surprise. More like confirmation of something delayed. Then you know the timeline was impossible. Silence followed. But this silence felt different. Not hiding. Revealing. Because the journey toward truth had just crossed a point of no return. And the question was no longer what happened that night. The real question now waited beneath everything. Morning light spread slowly across the diner floor. Soft gold touching places that had known only shadow for months. Dust no longer ruled the air. Fresh coffee steam curled upward like the room itself had begun breathing again. Aldrin did not move closer right away. The figure behind the counter deserved stillness. Moments like this could not be rushed without breaking something fragile. The older face carried deep lines shaped by years of quiet watching. Not fear. Not guilt alone. Something heavier. The weight of knowing and waiting at the same time. You kept the place closed. The voice came from Aldrin but sounded distant even to them. As if the room itself had spoken. A slow nod from behind the counter. Some doors should not open until someone is ready to see. Aldrin stepped forward. Each footstep gentle against tile that remembered too much. The faded stain near booth 7 seemed darker in daylight. Not larger. Just more honest. You sent the photograph. Another pause. But this one held less resistance. Yes. The single word settled calmly between them. Why now? Because you were the only one who would look at the floor instead of the story. Silence followed again. But now it felt shared. Not guarded. Aldrin studied the counter. The coffee machine. The ordinary objects that had witnessed an extraordinary ending. Everything looked simple. And that was the problem. Tell me what the report missed. The older figure inhaled slowly. Breath unsteady for the first time. It did not miss anything. It avoided something. Avoided what? Truth that would not fit inside a clean report. Outside, a truck rolled past on the distant highway. Low sound drifting through the thin diner walls. Life continuing without permission. Inside, the air felt tighter. Like the room itself leaned closer to listen. The official story said there was an argument. Loud voices. Sudden anger. A push near the counter. Another slow breath. But there was no argument. Aldrin's eyes sharpened slightly. Not surprise. More like confirmation of a fear already formed. No raised voices. No broken dishes. No struggle. Only conversation. Quiet. Serious. Long. How do you know? Because I was here. The words changed the space immediately. Not louder, but heavier. You were never in the witness list. I asked not to be. Why? The older eyes shifted toward booth 7. Moisture gathering but not falling. Because the truth would not have saved anyone. Aldrin felt the familiar pull between logic and emotion. Forensic work lived in facts. But facts were carried by people. And people were fragile. Start from the beginning. Morning had fully entered the diner now. Light stretching across the counter. Touching the older hands resting there. Hands that had carried this memory alone. They arrived just before closing. Calm. Too calm. Like someone who had already decided something. They. A small hesitation. The one who died. And the one who left alive. Aldrin stayed silent. Letting the story breathe at its own pace. They sat in booth 7 for almost an hour. Talking quietly. No anger. No fear. Just final words. Final in what way? Like goodbye spoken without saying goodbye. The air felt colder despite the sunlight. What happened next? They stood up slowly. Both of them. No sudden movement. The older voice trembled slightly now. I thought they were leaving together. But they walked toward the counter instead. Why? I still do not know. Memory moved behind tired eyes. Replaying a moment that refused to fade. Then everything became very still. Still how? Like time stopped to watch. No shouting. No struggle. Just one quick motion. So fast it felt silent. Aldrin's chest tightened. Not from fear. From recognition. Controlled motion. Yes. Where was the other person standing? Close. Very close. Facing them. Height difference. Almost none. Angle of impact. Straight. Deliberate. The words aligned perfectly with the pattern Aldrin had studied all night. Not an accident. Not rage. Choice. Did they say anything after? The older figure closed their eyes. One tear finally slipping free. Only one sentence. What sentence? A whisper filled the quiet diner. Thank you for keeping the promise. Aldrin felt the world narrow around those words. Because promises had started this journey. What promise? I never learned. Silence again. But now it carried grief instead of secrecy. What did the survivor do next? They lowered the body gently. Not panic. Not shock. Gentle. Yes. Then they looked at me. Why would they look at you? Because they knew I had seen. The memory pressed harder now. Voice shaking. I expected them to run. But they did not. What did they do? They asked me to call it an argument. To tell the police it was sudden. Ugly. Uncontrolled. And you agreed. Another long pause. Pain visible in every breath. Yes. Why? Because the truth in their eyes looked worse than any lie. Aldrin tried to imagine that moment. The choice. The fear. The impossible weight of deciding what story the world would hear. Who was the survivor? The older figure looked directly at Aldrin now. No more hiding possible. You already know. The words landed softly. But nothing had ever felt heavier. Aldrin's mind moved through memory. Faces at the funeral. Voices in the hospital. Promises whispered in fading light. One face remained. Impossible to ignore. But saying the name would make it real. And reality could not be undone. Footsteps sounded faintly outside the diner. Someone walking past on the sidewalk. Ordinary morning continuing just beyond the glass. Inside, everything stood on the edge of change. Why send the photograph now? Because the survivor is coming back. Cold spread through Aldrin's chest. Slow. Certain. When? Soon. To reopen the diner. No. The older voice dropped to a near whisper. To make sure the past stays buried. A new tension filled the room. Not memory this time. Danger. You think they will hurt someone. I think they believe truth is more dangerous than violence. Silence pressed in from every side. For the first time Aldrin felt something unfamiliar. Not confusion. Not grief. Urgency. If the survivor returned, then the wrong timeline might become permanent. And the promise Aldrin carried would break forever. What do you want me to do? The older figure's answer came without hesitation. Finish what you started. Let the floor speak. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last thin fog above the highway. Morning becoming day. Day becoming consequence. Inside the diner, two people stood between past and future. Between silence and truth. And somewhere not far away, another person was already on the road back to booth 7. The moment of waiting was ending. The real confrontation had begun, moving closer with every passing mile. And when it arrived, only one story would survive. The diner felt smaller after the truth was spoken. Walls that once held quiet now carried pressure. Every sound sharper. Every breath louder. Aldrin stood beside booth 7 without moving. Morning light no longer gentle. Now it revealed too much. The faded stain looked less like memory and more like a question waiting for an answer. Outside, a car passed slowly along Main Street. Tires humming against old pavement. A normal sound. But inside the diner it felt like a countdown beginning. How long do we have? The older voice answered softly. Not long. Fear did not arrive as panic. It arrived as clarity. Clean and cold. Aldrin's mind moved through possibilities. Evidence. Time. Choice. If the survivor returned before truth was spoken, the wrong story would close forever. We need proof that cannot be ignored. The older figure gave a faint nod. That is why I brought you back. Aldrin knelt again near the faded pattern on the tile. Not as a visitor now. As someone preparing to listen carefully. Blood patterns hold motion long after voices disappear. Direction. Force. Sequence. Each detail a quiet witness. The official report had reduced the night to chaos. But chaos leaves scattered marks. This pattern held order. Deliberate spacing. Controlled angle. One strike. Precise height. No defensive spray. Not anger. Decision. Aldrin traced the air above the stain without touching the floor. Reconstructing invisible movement. They stood close. Facing each other. No surprise. No attempt to escape. The older figure whispered, Yes. Then the final motion came from the survivor. Not sudden rage. A planned ending. Silence answered. That means intent. Yes. The word felt heavier than anything spoken before. Outside the wind shifted. Loose gravel scratching softly across the parking lot. Clouds drifting over the sun. Light inside the diner dimming slightly. Time moving forward whether truth was ready or not. Aldrin stood slowly. There is something else. What? The body was lowered gently. You said that. Yes. Gentle does not belong to fear. It belongs to care. The older eyes filled again. Because it was not hatred. Then what was it? The question hung in the air like dust refusing to fall. Footsteps sounded outside. Closer this time. Not passing. Approaching. Both of them turned toward the front windows. Shapes moving behind the glass. Distorted by light. A car door closed. Silence inside the diner deepened. Every second stretching thin. They are early. Aldrin felt the shift immediately. This was no longer memory. This was present. What happens if they see me here? The answer came quietly. Truth will have to speak faster. The front door handle moved slightly. Metal clicking once. Then stillness. Not yet entering. Waiting. Maybe listening. Aldrin's pulse remained steady. Years of standing inside final moments had taught calm. But calm did not remove consequence. We cannot hide. I know. Another soft sound at the door. Knuckles against metal. Slow. Certain. Not a request. A signal. The older figure closed their eyes briefly. As if gathering strength saved for this exact second. Go to the counter. Stand where I stood that night. Why? Because truth must be seen from the right place. Aldrin moved without arguing. Each step measured. Heart quiet but heavy. From behind the counter the room looked different. Angles clearer. Distance sharper. Booth 7 aligned perfectly with the faded stain. Exactly as described. Memory and physics matching at last. The knock came again. Louder now. Time ended. The older figure spoke toward the door. Voice steady despite everything. It is open. A pause followed. Long enough to feel like the past holding its breath. Then the door pushed inward. Cold daylight entered first. Followed by a figure stepping slowly across the threshold. Older than memory. But unmistakable. Eyes searching the room. Stopping when they reached Aldrin. No surprise. Only recognition mixed with something unreadable. You should not be here. The same sentence from the night before. But now it carried history instead of warning. Aldrin answered calmly. Neither should the lie. Silence closed around the three of them. Thick. Unavoidable. The survivor stepped fully inside. Letting the door fall shut behind them. The sound echoed softly through the empty diner. For a moment no one moved. Then the survivor looked toward booth 7. A shadow crossing their face. Gone as quickly as it appeared. You found the photograph. Yes. A slow breath. Almost relief. Almost regret. I hoped you would not understand it. But you did. Truth understands itself. The survivor's eyes hardened slightly. Truth is not always mercy. No. But lies are never peace. The words settled deep. Outside the wind faded. Even the world seemed to wait. The survivor glanced at the older witness. Pain flickering between them. Shared history too complex for simple blame. You told them. A quiet answer. Yes. Another long silence. Then the survivor spoke again. Voice lower than before. Do you know why it happened? Aldrin held steady. The pattern shows intent. Not reason. Reason matters. Then tell it. The survivor looked toward the ceiling. Toward nothing. Toward memory. It was a promise. The same word that had followed this story from the beginning. What promise? A fragile breath. To end suffering before it became unbearable. The air changed instantly. Not violence. Not revenge. Mercy. Aldrin felt the truth forming. Heavy. Complicated. Human. They asked you to do it. A slow nod. Eyes closing briefly. Yes. Silence filled every corner of the diner. Different now. Not sharp. Not cold. Grief shaped like understanding. The older witness began to cry quietly. Months of silence breaking at last. Aldrin's voice softened. Why hide mercy behind violence? Because the world does not understand gentle endings. Only crimes. So you created one. Yes. The confession rested in the open air. No anger. Only exhaustion. Footsteps of time continued outside. Cars passing. People living. Unaware of the truth, finally breathing inside an old diner. Aldrin looked again at the faded stain. Now no longer mystery. But memory shaped by love and pain together. Truth would not erase loss. But it would end the lie. And endings matter. The survivor's shoulders lowered. As if a weight carried too long had finally found the ground. What happens now? Aldrin answered quietly. Now the real story can live. Not in reports. Not in rumors. In honesty. Tears moved silently down the survivor's face. Not fear. Not relief. Something between. The long night that began months ago was finally reaching morning. But one final step still waited. The moment where truth leaves the room and enters the world. And that moment was coming closer with every heartbeat. Silence remained inside the diner long after the last words were spoken. Not an empty silence. A full one. Heavy with truth that had waited too long to breathe. Morning light continued to shift across the floor. Slow and patient. Touching the faded stain. Softening its edges. Changing it from something frightening into something remembered. No one rushed to speak again. Because moments like this cannot be hurried. They unfold in their own quiet time. The way sunrise replaces night without asking permission. Aldrin stood behind the counter, feeling the weight inside the room begin to change. Not lighter exactly. But clearer. Like fog lifting from a road that had always been there. The survivor's shoulders trembled once. Then slowly grew still. Months of holding a secret had carved deep lines into their face. Lines that now looked less like guilt and more like grief finally allowed to exist. The older witness wiped silent tears but did not look away. Pain shared in the open feels different from pain hidden in shadows. It still hurts. But it no longer isolates. Outside, a truck rolled past on the highway. Morning traffic building. Arctic ordinary life continuing step by step. Unaware that inside a small diner the past had just changed shape. Aldrin moved from behind the counter and stopped beside booth 7. The place where everything had ended. and where understanding had finally begun. For months this space had been frozen in a single violent story. A story simple enough for reports, clean enough for distance, but far too small for the truth that lived underneath. Now the room held something else. Not violence. Not fear. Choice. Love. Sorrow. Mercy wrapped in silence. Human things that do not fit neatly into legal words. The survivor spoke again. Voice quiet but steady in a new way. I never wanted the lie to live this long. Aldrin listened without judgment. Truth spoken late is still truth. And sometimes late is the only time possible. You carried it alone. I thought that was the price of mercy. A slow nod. Yes. The older witness finally stepped closer, each movement careful as if afraid the moment might break. It should not have been yours to carry alone. Another silence followed. But this one felt warmer. Like the first fragile step toward forgiveness. Outside sunlight grew stronger. Shadows shrinking across the parking lot. The world moving forward as it always does. Even when people feel stuck inside yesterday. Aldrin looked once more at the faded mark on the floor. The pattern that had refused to stay quiet. The small physical truth that had guided everything back to this room. Evidence does not speak with emotion. Yet it protects emotion by refusing to lie. Because of that, a promise made in a hospital hallway had not been lost. Aldrin finally asked the question waiting beneath everything. What do you want the world to know now? The survivor did not answer quickly. Eyes moving slowly across the diner. Counter. Windows. Booth 7. Memories resting in every corner. When the answer came, it arrived gently. That it was not anger. Not revenge. Not despair. Only the last kindness I could give. Tears returned to the older witness. But this time they were different. Less sharp. More like release. Some truths hurt when hidden, but heal when spoken. Aldrin understood something important in that moment. Justice is not always punishment. Sometimes justice is simply honesty allowed to exist. The law might still argue. The world might still judge. But truth would now walk beside whatever came next. And that mattered. Footsteps sounded faintly outside on the sidewalk. Voices passing. A car door closing. Ordinary sounds of a town waking fully into day. Life does not pause for revelation. It keeps moving. Inviting everyone to move with it. The survivor took a slow breath. As if preparing to step into something unknown but necessary. Will you tell them? Aldrin answered softly. I will tell the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. Fear flickered once across the survivor's eyes. Then faded. That is enough. Because deep down, truth had always been the only ending possible. Time passed quietly after that. No dramatic moment. No sudden change. Just three people standing in a room that no longer felt haunted. Only honest. Eventually the older witness turned on the coffee machine. The soft familiar sound filled the diner. Simple. Ordinary. Beautiful in its normalcy. Steam rose into the sunlight, carrying the scent of morning and second chances. Small actions can feel enormous after long darkness. The survivor sat slowly in booth 7. Not as a victim. Not as a criminal. As someone remembering love and loss at the same time. Aldrin remained standing nearby. Not intruding. Just present. Presence is sometimes the greatest kindness one person can offer another. Outside, the open sign was switched on for the first time in months. Red light glowing against the glass. A quiet signal to the town. The diner was alive again. A passing driver slowed slightly. Surprised. Curious. Then continued on. Life returning does not need announcement. It simply begins. Inside. Coffee was poured into 3 simple cups. No ceremony. No speeches. They drank in silence. But it was a peaceful silence now. The kind that follows truth instead of hiding it. Minutes later, the survivor stood. Strength slowly replacing exhaustion. I am ready. Ready for what? For whatever comes when the story is real. Aldrin nodded. Because courage rarely feels loud. It feels exactly like this. Quiet. Steady. Unavoidable. They walked together toward the front door. Each step leaving the past slightly farther behind. Before stepping outside, the survivor paused and looked back once more at Booth 7. Not with fear. With gratitude. And goodbye. Then the door opened. Daylight poured in. Bright and honest. For the first time. Nothing inside the diner needed to hide from it. Outside air felt warmer than before. Or maybe it only felt that way because truth changes how the world touches skin. People across the street continued their routines. Unaware that something heavy had just been set down. But that was all right. Not every truth needs an audience. Some truths exist simply to free the people who carry them. Aldrin watched as the survivor walked slowly toward the waiting road. Not running. Not hiding. Just moving forward. The older witness stood beside Aldrin. Breathing deeply as if learning air again. Do you think peace is possible now? Aldrin looked at the open doorway. At sunlight filling the diner behind them. Peace is not forgetting. Peace is remembering without fear. The words lingered gently between them. A new day had fully arrived. Cars moved. Voices carried. Doors opened across the town. Ordinary life continuing. But somewhere within it, 3 hearts felt lighter than the night before. Aldrin knew the work was not truly finished. Reports would change. Questions would come. Consequences would unfold in ways no one could fully control. But the most important ending had already happened. The lie was gone. And in its place stood something quieter. Stronger. More human. Truth shaped by mercy. Mercy revealed by truth. As the sun climbed higher above the small town, light reached every corner of the diner. Even the place where the faded stain remained. It did not disappear. Some marks never do. But it no longer felt dark. It felt like memory. And memory can live beside peace. Aldrin took one last look inside before turning toward the road. The promise made long ago had finally been kept. Not by solving a mystery, but by allowing a story to be honest. Sometimes that is the deepest justice the world can offer. And sometimes, the quietest truths change everything.